Okay, so let's get started. So this is supposed to be the last lecture with new material, so I hope we can finish off the course today. And then on Friday it's the last lecture, and there's going to be a little bit of a review, talk about the exam, and also a Q&A. If you have questions, we can try to answer them. The topic of today is Wi-Fi, finish off that, and then a short introduction to network security. This network security is a new addition to the course. So I'll say this several times, but I'll say right now that that network security has not been on any previous exams for the reason that it was not part of the course. Now it's part of the course, which means it might show up on the exam. Right? Okay. Not completely unlikely. Okay. Review. We talked about Wi-Fi last time, and the Wi-Fi is 802.11 IEEE standard. It's a MAC and physical layer standard, and it has many variations. So we will just talk about a small subset, but the most common subset of it. The medium access method, the most common one is called DCF, and it stands for Distributed Coordinating Function. And coordinating function means that essentially we coordinate the different stations so that they transmit in some well-behaved manner. And the technology used in the DCF is carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. If you remember, Ethernet was with the CSMA with collision detection. Here's collision avoidance. And the reason for that is that in wireless it's very difficult to detect collisions directly when we are transmitting. So it's hard to listen to the channel while we're transmitting in wireless. So this collision avoidance, what does it mean? Well, it means that we listen to a medium during a time interval, which is called the diffs. And if it's idle during this, then we can transmit. Then if a busy medium, that is, if it's busy during this one, it leads to a back off. And we'll see an example of that later on. So we wait until the channel is free under a diffs again, and then we back off a number of slots. And the number of slots we back off is randomly chosen in what's known as a contention window, similar to what's done on Ethernet. And then we count down this back-off counter until the medium is idle, and when it's idle, we transmit. We'll see an example in a short while. Repeated retransmissions, that means when that happens, that means that there are many stations that would like to communicate, right? Because if there are collisions, there is competition for the channel. And what to do then in order to avoid these collisions and retransmissions is to increase the time span for which we back off. So repeated retransmissions cause the contention window to grow exponentially to reduce the probability of collisions. And this is very similar to what's done on Ethernet. Now, if one has a lot of these problems with a lot of collisions, that could be due to a hidden terminal problem. And the hidden terminal problem is that a station that listens to a channel is unable to detect an ongoing transmission. That is, that the transmitter is hidden for the station who's listening to the channel. That's called the hidden terminal problem. And then the station who is listening to the channel might erroneously think that the channel is idle, and then starts to transmit, and we have a collision. To minimize that problem, or to handle that problem to some extent, we can use this RTS-CTS handoff. We'll see an example of that in a short while. Carrier sensing in IEEE 802.11 can be done in two ways. Basically, we can do physical carrier sensing or virtual carrier sensing. And physical carrier sensing is the type of carrier sensing that we have talked about before. We simply listen to the channel and listen to the power level, and if the power level increases, we suspect that something is ongoing, and we declare the station as busy, declare this channel as busy. We can also do virtual carrier sensing, and this is done. So this is done at the physical layer. I mean, we measure the receipt power. When the receipt power goes up, we think the channel is busy. We can also do virtual carrier sensing at the MAC layer, and what that means is basically that the physical layer is able to decode the frame or the bits that belong to the frame, and these bits are then being processed by the MAC layer. Inside the MAC header, there is a field called duration that tells everybody else how long this frame exchange will take in microseconds. So there is a duration field in the header of the data. So if one can decode the header, one can figure out how long time it will take until the frame has been delivered. And delivered means that the frame has been transmitted and an acknowledgement has been received. So then, if we can decode the duration field, we can adjust some type of timer, which is, for some reason, is called the network allocation vector, to indicate when the channel will be idle. So we can think of this as a timer whose timeout we have set depending on the duration field in the header. So here, if one is able to decode the header here, there is no need to sense the channel because we know it's going to be busy for a certain period of time, and we can take advantage of this by maybe going down in power save mode or something. All right. Either way, if either the virtual carrier sensing or the physical carrier sensing declares the channel as busy, we think the channel is busy. So one can say that these are two methods that work in parallel, and as long as one of them declares the channel as busy, the channel is as declared as busy at the receiver or at the station. Okay, so if we want to go through an exchange of frames using this, we have now a number of stations. We have a source station that has data to transmit. We have a destination who's interested in the data, and then we have all the others. Okay, so there could be many, many stations here, but these are two specific ones. So if the source has data to transmit, the first thing it needs to do is to listen to the channel for a specific period of time, and it has to be either during this period of time before transmission can start. And the time interval is called the diffs. So this is interframe spacing is the IFS, and D here stands for DCF, which is the MAC method that we use here. Okay, so the source here listens to the channel and it's all free. It's all idle. So now it's allowed to start to transmit. So it starts to transmit a data frame. The destination is decoding this data frame, but all the other ones that can decode this data frame is doing that also and looking at the header. Okay, so in this data frame there is a header, there is actually the data, and then there is a trailer. Okay, but in the header there is a field called the duration field that tells everybody else how long it will take to transmit this frame, wait for a while, and then get back the acknowledgement. Okay. Those stations that can decode this duration field in the header here sets its timeout, its nav, to be equal to the duration field. Those microseconds which are indicated in the duration field here. So all the stations that can decode this one knows it needs to wait until this time before the channel can possibly be available again. So they can do other things here. You know, watch a movie or go to sleep or something like that. There's nothing they can do here. Okay, so this is called also that waiting for access is we defer access. We wait until we can start to think about using the channel again. Okay, in the destination, after the data frame is done, it decodes the data frame and so forth and check the CRC and everything like that. And if everything is okay, then it starts to transmit its acknowledgement frame. And it does that after a time interval equal to a SIFS. And this S here stands for short interframe spacing. So this time here is smaller than this time. And the reason for this is that all stations were that were unable to set their nav because they could not decode the header of this one, they will listen to the channel and believe it's busy here, busy, because he hears the power here, but not necessarily the bits. And here starts to say, oh, it's empty now. So if after a diffs here, I'm able to transmit. But then the ACK frame came in here before the diffs time has expired, and then all those stations will believe that the channel is busy until this time. Okay. So the reason for having a smaller interframe spacing here is to not allow other stations to jump in and collide with the ACK frame. Okay. So the shorter the interframe spacing is, the higher priority the successive frame has. Okay. And then after this time period has expired, there is a time where the channel needs to be free before we can start to use the channel again. Okay. But every station that has become ready during this interval, that is when the channel is busy, becoming ready meaning it has a frame to transmit, they also need to back off, not only wait until this time, but they also need to back off a number of slots here before they can start to transmit. And the reason for that is that if two stations become ready here during this time, they will both wait until this time, and then both wait in diffs, and if they start to transmit here, for sure they will collide. Okay. So we need to back off after the diffs, otherwise we will have for sure a collision here. So that's the collision avoidance part in CSMA CA. So then we back off for transmission. Okay, and that could be a number of slots, and this is a random number of slots. And whoever station that got the fewest slots here will win and then capture the channel. Okay, so that's the main procedure. Any questions? Okay. So let me just stress here. At this moment in time, several stations might have frames to transmit. All of them have individual back-off counters, and they all start to count down. So suppose suppose we have two stations that became ready during this time. So they know that the channel is busy, and then they start to see at this time is here. So we will wait for a diffs before starting to count down. Okay, and if station A here has a back-off counter of say 4, and this one has a back-off counter of say 3, what's going to happen? Well, they start to count down here. At this point, after one of these slots, we will count down from 4 to 3 here, and here to 2. Okay, started by 3, and then we became 2 at this point. And then the next slot, we get 2 here, 1 here. Next slot here, we get 1, and here we get 0. Okay, so at this point in time, the back-off counter for the station here has expired, and it will start to transmit its frame, its data frame. What would the station up here? Well, it would do carrier sensing during the slot and figure out, oh no, somebody else got the channel, so I have to wait. Okay, and it has to wait until this data frame has expired, so at this point, and then there will be a SIFS, and then there will be an ACK due to this. And here, the channel would then start to become idle again. The station up here is still in back-off mode. it has backoff counter 1 at this point in time. It has to wait for a diffs. And then it counts down once, going to 0. And here it can start to transmit its frame. And there will be an ACK coming back from the whatever the destination of that frame is. So here's how it works, right? Whenever the channel is busy, we wait until it's free for a diffs, and then we start to count down the backoff counter. If during this backoff we determine that the channel has become busy again, we have to wait until it becomes idle for a diffs again, and then we resume the backoff counter. So eventually we will be able to transmit. But it might take time. Okay. Now, since we are backing off, reducing the backoff counter all the time, eventually we will have priority over the other stations who are waiting, right? Okay. If we do this RTS-CTS handshake before transmission, it's similar to what we did when we don't use RTS-CTS. But here, we have to wait for a diffs, and then the source send a request to send message, which is a control frame, which is much shorter than a data frame. However, everybody who can listen to this RTS frame can see a duration field of that, and then put the nav counter to be equal to the duration of this one. And this can be done for all those nodes who can listen to the source node. Okay? That might not be everyone, or rather, it will not be everyone. But those who can will do this. The destination will wait for a CIFS and then reply with the CTS, clear to send. Everybody who can hear the clear to send can put the nav counter to the duration field, which is in the header of the CTS frame, this one. And then there is a CIFS, and then after that the source can transmit its data. And then again, if there was somebody who didn't hear the RTS or CTS, they can put their nav from the duration field in the data. Okay, and all of these navs are to the end of the ACK, which comes from the destination in this case. So this RTS-CTS handshake, it takes some time here. So this is, in a way, wasted time, because data is not transmitted during this time. But by doing this, we might avoid that the data frame here is colliding with some other data frame. And data frames are much, much longer typically than the RTS-CTS frames. So overall, this could be a gain when we have a lot of hidden terminals in our topology. Now, I think the use of RTS and CTS is optional in the standard, and it's something that you can configure as a network administrator. I don't think this is very often used, actually, but it's there in the standard. And again, the backoff mechanism is the same as before. We wait for a diffs and then back off a number of slots. If we get to 0, we transmit. If somebody else gets to transmit before we get to 0, we have to wait and resume our backoff decount, decrementing after the channel becomes idle over 1 diffs again. Questions? No. Okay. Now this thing that to have an acknowledgement here on the MAC layer is basically because in wireless many frames gets damaged in transmission, so it's good to do error recovery as quickly as possible. So that's why we have these acknowledgements here. Okay. So to summarize, collision avoidance. When a channel senses the channel to be busy, what does it do? It waits until the channel becomes idle for a diffs period. And then it starts to count down its backoff counter. 4, 3, 2, 1, right? The station transmits the frames when the backoff timer expires. Okay. So, if two stations who are waiting to send a frame has the same backoff counter, what will happen? There will be a collision. Okay. So collision avoidance is not perfect, right? It tries to avoid collisions, but collisions can certainly happen, and it happens exactly when two or more stations that are waiting for access have the same backoff counter. Okay. So these backoff counters, they are random, right? So they're chosen in a certain window, which is called the contention window. Receiving stations that receives error-free frames sends an ACK. A sending station that does not hear the ACK will then interpret that as the frame is lost. Okay? And then it will have to retransmit. And these backoff counters here are selected randomly in a certain interval. And the shorter the interval is, the shorter the average backoff time is. The longer the interval is, the longer the average backoff time is. But also when the longer it is, there are more possibilities to avoid collisions. Because the shorter the interval is, the more likely it is that two stations gets the same backoff counter and a collision. So what do? Whenever we don't hear an ACK, then we double the size of the contention window. That is, double the maximum value of the backoff counter. And thereby we reduce the risk of a subsequent collision. Right. So this is very similar to the Ethernet binary exponential backoff procedure. And then we execute the backoff and retransmit. If there still doesn't get if we still don't get an ACK, then we double the contention window once more, and we keep on going this until we get the frame through. Once we get the frame through, we reduce the backoff window, the contention window, to its smallest size again, and we restart everything. Okay, then during these retransmissions, obviously we need to have sequence numbers here to avoid duplicates at the receiver. Because if we lose an ACK, not hearing an ACK is not the same thing as the frame was lost. The frame could be decoded, but the ACK could be lost. Okay. And then the maximum size of the contention window is then reset to its smallest value after the reception of an ACK. So to give you some ideas of what times we are talking about, this it depends on the physical layers, these slot times and everything like this. So for 802.11a with 20 megahertz channel spacing, a slot time is 9 microseconds. So that's the fundamental unit of time. And then we have a CIFS is 16 microseconds. A PIFS, which is not really used, but anyways, it's a CIFS plus a slot times, which is this. DIFS is is this time here. It is a CIFS plus 2 slot times, that is 34. Yeah, okay, 34 microseconds. Okay, so here we see, of course, that the short interframe spacing is smaller than the DCF interframe spacing. The minimum size of the contention window is 15, okay, which means that the initial choice of backoff counter is then selected uniformly in an interval from 0 to 15. Okay. The initial one. So this is the minimum size of the contention window. If there will be a collision, then the contention window goes from 0 to 31. It doubles the size of it. Okay. And then this keeps on going until it can get to its maximum value, which is 1023. Okay. So the first time we wait for access, we select the backoff counter between 0 and 15. If we get a collision, then we say, okay, there seems to be other people who would like to access the channel also. So let's spread out our next attempt between 0 and 31. If that doesn't work, we go to 0 and 63, etc. And the latest one is from 0 to 1023. Okay. Again, we would like to have these backup times here as short as possible, because then we are using the channel as efficiently as possible, but not short enough, but not too short, because then we have a lot of collisions. Okay. There are different types of frames in 802.11. We have these management frames, control frames, and data frames. And data frames we talked about earlier, so these are just transmitting data. We have control frames, and these are for RTS, CTS, and acknowledgements. And then there is also management frames that we haven't really talked about earlier. But what are those? Those are for association and disassociation with the access point. So when you log on to the network and when you log off the network, for timing and synchronization between the access point and the station, authentication, and so forth. Okay. Frame structure looks something like this. We have a header. We have the MAC layer service data unit. So this is what we get from if we're the MAC layer, this is the data we get from the layer above us. And then there is a CRC, a 4-byte CRC, 32 bits. If one looks at the MAC header here, there is a frame control. Never mind that. Then this duration ID, duration, which is the really important. That was used to set the nav for the stations that were able to decode the header. So this tells us how long it will take to transfer this frame, including a potential ACK. Okay, and then there is a couple of addresses and sequence control, actually 4 addresses here. So let's explain why. So the MAC header together is 30 bytes. This blue part, which is the payload from the layer above us, could be from 0 to 23 12 bytes. Okay, so this is larger than a typical packet on Ethernet, which is 1500 bytes. I'm not sure if we actually so often use this maximum size here. The CRC is one specific CRC. There are many CRCs. It uses this one. And it's calculated over the MAC header and frame body. So everything from here, this part, and this part is covered in the CRC. Okay. So we protect both the header and the data with this one. The multiple address fields here is needed because we send frames typically through an access point. So I don't recall exactly the order here, but we could say that this is the sending station, or suppose, I don't know, take this with a grain of salt. One is the sending station, one is the receiving station, and one is the access point, which is in the middle, right? Because the station sends the data to the access point that sends it down to the station. Okay, so that's why we have 3 addresses here. Actually, we have a 4th one here, and let's ignore that. It will not be on the exam. So. Okay. Physical layers, or the layer structure is like this. On top of all IEEE 802 MACs, there is this LLC layer. Then we have the MAC layer, and then we have the physical layer convergence procedure, and then the physical layer. Okay, so let's go through this. We have at the top, there is a PDU from LLC, and that becomes then the MAC service data unit. Okay, these are the same bits. Then there is this MAC header and then a CRC from here. Okay. The next step is then when this is pushed down to the physical layer, but since there are many different physical layers here, there is a sort of like an interface layer here that takes these bits and formats them for that specific physical layer. Okay? Because this physical layer, as we see, it could be QPSK or 64 QAM. It could use multiple antennas or just one antenna and so forth. It could be many different things, right? So therefore, there is this convergence procedure that basically takes the data bits here and then produces something which is suitable for the physical layer. Okay, and there are some preambles and headers and so forth. So let's see, one physical layer is this. So here we have time, and here we have frequency. And each of the squares here could be seen as one QAM symbol. The white parts here are not used. The blue parts here has to do with for synchronization and channel estimation. The yellow parts here is header information, and the green part is actually payload data. Just to show you how a physical layer could be built up. During this time, the receiver synchronized in frequency and time to the transmitted signal. Here it estimates the channel to undo the phase rotation and amplitude gain over the channel. Here there's some yellow, in the yellow bits here, it basically informs the physical layer of the duration of this and some other things, coding formats and so forth. And then each of these green things carries some data bits, which are then decoded by the receiving physical layer. I said that there are many different physical layers, so even in a layout like this, we can use different types of modulation schemes, everything from BPSK to 64 QAM. There is a error control coding, so these are coded symbols, so there's coding for error correction. These have different coding rates here. So from 1/2, which is the most powerful correction we can have here, to the least powerful correction here. And the reason why we have different tiers is because as we go down here, we can transmit more bits per symbol, so we can get a higher data rate. But it's also requiring higher signal-to-noise ratio. So depending on what the signal-to-noise ratio is, one negotiates one of these transfer rates. Okay. So if you go into your laptop and if you can view what the Wi-Fi network is using at this moment, you see that you will pick one of these. Right. So in the last lecture, in the slides of the last lectures, there was a screenshot from my laptop, and it said that it used 802.11n with modulation encoding index 6. So for that, in that particular moment when I took the screenshot, my laptop was using 64 QAM, a rate 3/4 correction code, and then there's a bunch of other parameters here which are not so important at this moment. Okay. So if I had done the screenshot at some other time, maybe I would be lucky to get 64 QAM with 5/6 code, or I could be in worse conditions here. At the end of the day, what is important is this number. So this is the data rate I can get. So in this one was close to 59 megabits per second. But if I'm in a bad signal-to-noise ratio situation, I can maybe get only 6.5 megabits per second. Okay. Questions? So that's all about Wi-Fi in this course, at least. So wireless networks is really where a lot of challenges are because of the interference situation, because of the problems of doing carrier sensing in this. So there are many. These are quite complex protocols, and a lot of things are still ongoing, both research-wise and development-wise. So that's why you see 4G, 5G, 6G soon, perhaps. I'm pretty sure, and so forth. So there is always a development here in order to use the channel as more efficiently than what we can do today. All right. So let's move on to the next step here then in the course, and that has to do with security and network security. And this is a huge area, right? So we can only scratch the surface, but I thought it would be nice, and this is actually due to student feedback, to give you some very basic notions of what the security is all about and the different types of methods that are used. So if you look in the learning outcomes for this course, there are many learning outcomes, but there is one which is related to security. And you should be able at the end of the course to explain the concept of symmetric cryptography, asymmetric cryptography, and hash functions, and how these can be combined to provide confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. So this is what we will talk about today. And this is new for this academic year, so it has not been on all the exams. So if you want to predict what's going to be on the new exam in a week's time, you cannot predict. Basically, there will be something on this on the exam, right? So I'm just saying that if you just look at the old exams, you might be tricked in thinking that there will be nothing on security. But the only reason for this is that this is new for this year. So again, security is super important. That will be even more, perhaps even more important in the future, because we have the Internet of Things, we have, connected devices and so forth. We have the smart grid, e-health, and everything like that. So security is of paramount importance here. And unfortunately, it's also not perfect. So security, as I said, is a huge thing, right? You should really take a course if this interests you, because what I will say now is just scratching the surface. But modern security is built on a thinking called computational security. So that means that if we do something, we say that things are, we try to protect data or make encryption good or something like that. And then we are saying that it might be impossible to do something. And when we say that something is impossible, what we really mean, it's not possible with realistic computational power, right? So with realistic computational resources, we might think of that as being access to all the computers on the Earth and run them full time for 10 years to do something, right? That should be maybe something that we would see as unlikely that somebody would devote this much power to this, right? And then we can say, okay, if my cryptography cannot be broken by all the computers in the world running for 10 years, then I say it's safe. Then I say it's secure. Is it secure? No, because it can be decoded, but it takes forever to do it and super expensive, right? But of course, if we're doing something like in the military or something like that, then perhaps we think that some adversary power, say the National Security, NSA in the US, they probably have a lot of computers, right? Okay, and then we have to design the cryptography to this. If we are afraid of somebody who's hacking this with their own 15-year-old PC, then maybe we should not be so careful. We don't need to be so careful. So, computational security basically means that it's expensive, time-consuming to breach the security that we are providing, but it's not impossible. Computational security also relies on an assumption that certain mathematical problems are hard, computational hard. It's hard to do this. And one such problem is that it's hard to factorize a large number that has only 2 prime factors. Okay. Another one is that it's hard to do discrete logarithms in finite fields. There is a number of these problems that are believed to be very hard. They're believed to be very hard because nobody has been able to crack them, even though people have tried for hundreds of years, maybe. Does that mean that it's guaranteed to be hard? No. It's just that we believe them to be hard, and we have good evidence for this. But surprises can occur, right? So cryptographic schemes are constantly being analyzed for weaknesses. So the security people that do research on this, what they do is they design security, cryptography or whatever, and then the rest of the research world is trying to break it, right? So it's like you design something, somebody's trying to break it. When they've broken it, you update it somehow, or you say, oh, this was a bad idea, and you throw it away. Okay, so it's just constant challenges on this. Then, of course, the bad guys are also trying to do this. However, they don't tell you when they have broken your stuff. You might just notice that, right, in one bad way or another. Okay. Schemes that are proven deficient should either be fixed or taken out of service. This is a problem, right? Because not everyone is patching their security system. So there might be many systems out there on the internet today which are not secure. Okay. So we should remember this, that even though things are not perfect. Okay. So now let's go into what we mean by these things and how we can provide those with these type of tools. So the first thing one thinks about when it comes to security is confidentiality, to keep things secret. Okay. So the prototypical setup for secrecy is like we have Alice that would like to communicate with Bob. Okay. So Alice has a message which is called the plain text, that she would like to deliver to Bob over a channel where there are bad people. And the bad person here is Eve. Eve for eavesdropper, which means tjuvlyssnare. Okay. So Eve here listens to the channel. Okay. And the goal is to make sure that this message cannot be read by Eve. So what do? Well, we do as what's been done for thousands of years. We encrypt the message. Okay. So the plain text here is encrypted by some machinery here into what's known as a ciphertext. So this ciphertext C is taking this encryption mechanism that is reliant on a certain secret key. Okay, so this is something which is known to Alice. It's also known to Bob, but it should be kept a secret to Eve. Okay, so if we have this secret key, we can make this ciphertext so such that Eve is unable to decode even a single bit out of this message. Okay, so Eve should not learn a single bit out of this message. It could be thousands of bits here. So it's not enough that she cannot decode the whole message. She should not be able to decode anything about the message. Okay. So Eve here sees the ciphertexts, knows about the encryption and decryption algorithm. These are publicly known algorithms. They're pseudocode on the internet and so forth. So there is no secret in the actual machinery here, in the encryption and decryption algorithm. The only thing which is secret here is the key. Okay. So the scheme here is known as said to be secure if Eve cannot learn even a single bit of the plain text. Okay. And what we mean by that is she cannot do that with a reasonable effort. If she had all the computers in the world times 10 and 2,000 years to do this, for sure she could break this. She can decode this, right? But she's not allowed, she doesn't have that. Okay, so that's no problem, right? Okay. Questions on this setup? No, okay. Example of such a scheme is known as the one-time pad, and this has actually been used in practice, and it's yes.
How do you send the keys together without?
You're getting ahead. So the main problem with this scheme is to make sure that you transfer the key between the Alice and Bob. Okay. So it could be like Alice and Bob met in a secret room and handed over their keys, or that you have a courier with a USB stick that goes from Alice to Bob with the key. So during the Cold War, there was an encryption hotline between Washington and and Moscow. And what they did is that they printed out the key on paper, put that in a suitcase, and put that in the hand of an agent, a courier, that took a flight from Washington to Moscow or the other way around. That's how they transferred the key. This is a problem, right? But let's take 15 minutes and then talk about the one-time pad. Fantastiskt.